of this kind. I was brought up to think of fighter command as the heroes, as Anthony was. Bomber command always been a bit more difficult for us. But I have an anecdote I'm just going to tell you now, which I think makes the history of the RAF imperishable, though most RAF people don't know about it. The midnight of the century, as we old comrades call it, the midnight of the century is the Hitler-Stalin Pact, the worst moment in the history of civilization. The handshake between Molotov and Ribbentrop, the raising of the swastika flag over Moscow airport, the singing of the Horst Wessel lead on Moscow radio, the embrace of the two dictators, the crushing of Poland between them, the destruction of the Baltic, abolition really of the Baltic states, and the preparation for a ghastly war. Well, Mr. Molotov was back in Berlin, because the alliance went on well into the 40s, as you know, on one balmy night in late 1940, early 1941, and he had to take shelter with his ghastly Nazi hosts because the RAF had arrived on a rather paltry raid, but it was enough to send the Nazis and their guests, rather embarrassed, down into the shelter. And while Molotov was there with his Nazi friends, he said, "I thought you told me this could not happen." I don't think the pilots knew how brilliantly they had performed on this occasion, but if you allow yourself to think about this rather magnificent moment where it's Britain's airmen against Hitler and Stalin combined, mantles the English cheek with a great blush of pride, then you reflect on, you are obliged to reflect on the following. 2 years before, a group of Germans who we know them by their, some of them by their individual names, some of them by their collective name, the Kreisau Group, a group of very important German soldiers and diplomats and officers and civilian politicians, grouped around the heroic, I think, especially heroic, General Helmut von Moltke. Ludwig Beck was another member of it. Admiral Canaris was briefly a member, I believe. At my old college in Oxford, we had an annual commemoration for Adam von Trott-Zusolz, who was another member of it, later to give his life hideously in the plot to kill Hitler in 1944. They sent an envoy to Neville Chamberlain and said, if you and your foreign minister, Mr. Halifax, if you will guarantee that you will stand by Czechoslovakia, in other words, if you will say that a move into Czechoslovakia means war, we can decapitate the Nazi regime and tell the German people we have saved them not just from the foul dictator, but from war as well, that we have struck for peace as well as for democracy. But we need your guarantee that you will fight for Czechoslovakia before we can act. The risk these gentlemen took in making this move is something that's very difficult to imagine as a matter of quality and bravery. And they were told, forget it. We like the present situation in Germany. We hope, rather, to make an alliance with it against Stalin, against communism. And as Trotsky was the first to point out, once they made that pact at Munich with Hitler, ignoring the opposition in Germany, they made the Hitler-Stalin Pact inevitable. So that the whole might of Britain, air, navy and military, which was exerted on Hitler's side in 1938, should later be used to bomb and destroy German civilians, is a conclusion that's inescapable, very Stalin pointed out, and, if you like, impossible to live with. And to make it worse, we find, within a few years of this, that the obliteration of the city of Dresden, one of the most extraordinary achievements of European civilization, the entire obliteration of it and most of its people, is being justified for one reason and one reason alone. If we do it, it will impress Joseph Stalin, whose forces are pressing in on the other end. Now, I think if you're going to destroy a cultural treasure house and ignite a firestorm that is designed to consume all of the people in it, you had better have a better reason than it might bring a smile to Joseph Stalin's face. And this is not part of our official history. This is not what we're taught in school, ladies and gentlemen, in England, meine Damen und Herren, I can assure you. Now, how to confront these, I hope I've connected them for you, these multiply imbricated crimes and ironies and tragedies, how to make sense of it. The way I propose to do it is this. By imagining myself not as an Englishman or an Anglo-American, but as a German, which I'd be proud to be, and in fact, on my mother's side, through the city of Breslau, going back quite a long way now, I am. I was brought up in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War in Plymouth and Portsmouth. I remember being told not to play on the bomb sites. I remember seeing the ruins, the smell that still went on, actually, of the dug out, collapsed buildings and so forth. I remember the devastation. Was the scene of my upbringing. I also remember the little island of Malta, where I was partly brought up too, which was almost totally destroyed. Its beautiful capital, Valletta, almost completely destroyed by the air forces of Hitler and Mussolini. I especially remember the awful wreckage of the Royal Opera House in the centre of the city. And my father was a member of the Royal Navy and had a very tough time indeed in the North Atlantic and elsewhere. On Boxing Day, if you care, 1942, his ship sank the Scharnhorst, which was about to undertake a terrible campaign against civilian shipping in the North Sea. It was a better day's work than I've ever done. I mention it just in cases of interest. But in my heart and sinew, I feel German about this. And if I can commit the embarrassment of mentioning the following names, not in the same breath as my own, of course, I hope I'll make my point. I'm thinking of Thomas Mann. I'm thinking of Pastor Niemöller and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great Protestant resistors of Franz Jägerstatter, who was executed rather than join Hitler's army as a Catholic. He was an Austrian. I'm mentioning Austrians too. Ernst Fischer, who broadcast from Moscow against the advances of the Wehrmacht in Russia. Chancellors Willy Brandt and Bruno Kreisky, who left their own countries and joined the armed forces of others rather than surrender to fascism. Kurt Schumacher. Some of you will know some of these names. All of them, I think, should be made imperishable in our history as well as that of Germany and Austria. And these, of course, are heroes I'm talking about. But how many heroes do you think there might have been whose names we'll never know in, say, Hamburg, a city that had always withstood the National Socialists, that had always remained, as it were, red and democratic? How many people who carried within themselves the seeds of a future Germany, and a better Germany, were destroyed by the RAF? We used to have a question, a rather smug one in England after the war. Where were all the good Germans all this time? Well, one answer to that, I'm very sorry to say, is many of them were buried and burned alive by the Royal Air Force. And the fact has to be faced. But now look at it the other way. We got Billy Wilder, Albert Einstein, Theodor Adorno, Marlene Dietrich, Sigmund Freud, and the Germans got Julius Streicher in exchange for the collapse of civilization that was undertaken by Nazism. And I now come to another name, that of Victor Klemperer. Could I just get an idea of how many of you in the room know who I'm talking about? Oh, that's admirable. Well, for those on C-SPAN then, if I can, media conscious Hitchens. Victor Klemperer, the cousin, I think, of the famous conductor Otto, was a German Jew, convert to Protestantism, married to a German Protestant woman, professor of French language and literature at the University of Dresden, and on the first day of the Third Reich he decided to keep a diary, and he kept it every single day till 1933. He's the only man of whom we can read of every single day of the Third Reich. It's called I Will Bear Witness. Don't start reading it late at night, would be my advice. Do not start reading it late at night, because you know what's coming and he doesn't. So when they take away his cat, because Aryan cats are not allowed to live in partly Jewish homes, seriously, when they take away his job, when they take away his ration book, when they make him wear the star, when they say you can't now use the tram, you can't now use the bus, all this humiliation, you know it's going to get only steadily worse. And you're only encouraged by the fact that almost every day he reports that a member of the German working class comes up to him and says, "Cheer up, mate, these bastards will soon be gone. Don't worry, we're with you. The scoundrels can't last much longer." The way he listens to the radio, the way he looks at the newspapers, the way he disproves, if you like, the Daniel Jonah Goldhagen thesis, which I regard as a defamation of the German people and of their history, the vile collectivization of guilt that's involved in the willing executioner. But for all the friendship he's shown, the machine grinds on and on.